Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to CRISIL's session on the agricultural sector. A very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Ashok Gulati, Mr. Siv Kumar, and Mr. Vilas Shinde, who will have a panel discussion with our Chief Economist, Mr. D.K. Joshi, after CRISIL's presentation. Like every year, at the closure of the sowing, we come up with our views on the sector in terms of farm profitability. We will have a short presentation by our senior economist Dipti Deshpande and Bhushan Sharma, rural and consumption specialist. This will be followed by the panel discussion with the panelists, and we will end up with a Q&A session. During the course of the panel discussion, you would also have some poll questions pop up on your screen. Please use the opportunity to voice your view. All lines for participants will remain in a listen-only mode. During the Q&A session, they can drop their questions in the Q&A box for us to pick up. Please note that the presentation is being recorded. The COVID-19 pandemic has now become an integral part of our life. In a way, we have learned to live with it and its impact as well. While we all know urban incomes are impacted significantly, the only ray of hope for the Indian economy is the rural story. Rains have only elevated those hopes levels as monsoon continues to remain 5% above the normal as on August 18. Sowing is expected to be around 2 to 3% higher on a low base of 2020 and also on the peak of 2017, clearly reaffirming this hope. Crops like paddy have been seeing very good sowing in the eastern states amid river migration in COVID times and also on a low base. Further, cotton sowing has also inched up in northern India. Crops like sugarcane, paddy, and apple are expected to be among the better profitable crops in our assessment of 25 key crops spread across cereals, pulses, fruits, and vegetables. On the other hand, crops like cotton, maize, and onion are expected to see a sharpest drop in profits amid demand concerns and higher production. All in all, we believe that farmers' income from cultivation activities, which is around 50% of his household income, could see an increase of around 8 to 10%. Government procurement for crops like paddy, effective disbursement of second installments of PM Kisan, and of course the trajectory of the rains will remain a monitorable for us. So with this, let me hand over to Dipti to take us through CRISIL's assessment of the rains. Over to you, Dipti.
Thank you, Hetal. A very good afternoon to everyone and welcome. Rains have been pouring abundantly in most parts of the country, even as we move towards the last week of August. The season began with copious rainfall in June, which at an all India level was 15% above normal as of end June. On the slide, you'll see July also saw heavy downpour with some moderation towards the last 2 weeks. But rains caught up soon after, recording a slightly above normal reading of 5% over the long period average at the all India level. Region-wise, rains have been most abundant in the south, with 4 key states, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh, seeing a surplus, while other regions recording rainfall in the normal category. In the northwest, rains had turned mildly deficient in July, especially in Rajasthan, but have quickly recovered. Healthy and well-spread rains this year raise hope amid the pandemic and bode well for most states. Overall, rains so far fare well on 3 metrics. First, not only did they arrive on time, but also covered the entire country at least 12 days ahead of the normal date. Second, its spread has been healthy across regions. About 46% of all rainfall districts have received normal rains this far. This is the highest figure in the last 5 years. And third, good spatial and temporal distribution in the early part of the season hastened sowing across crops in most states. As of August 14th, data available from the government suggests that about 95% of the normal total Kharif acreage area has already been covered. This seeds hope that agriculture can help the pandemic-stricken economy from sinking too low this fiscal. Good performance of agriculture is also clearly reflected in this year's DRIP scores. CRISIL's proprietary index, the Deficient Rainfall Impact Parameter or DRIP, looks beyond rainfall volume data to look at any impact of rainfall deficiency on vulnerable states and crops. Developed in 2002, the DRIP index captures both the magnitude of the shock, that is rainfall deficiency, and vulnerability of a region basis the percentage of unirrigated area. So that way, the impact of deficient rainfall or any moderation in rains will be more pronounced for unirrigated crops and regions. The value of the index typically falls between 0 and 100. The higher the DRIP score, more adverse is the impact of deficient rains. We compare scores not just with the previous year, but also with the previous 5-year average to get a holistic picture of the impact. On the next slide, we look at how some of our DRIP scores fare. DRIP scores indicate some stress for Rajasthan, where relatively lower irrigation levels, weakness in rainfall for about 3 consecutive weeks pushed the scores higher. The way to look at this chart is the orange bar indicates DRIP scores for 2020. The green bars indicates the scores for 2019. Where you don't see the green bars is the year when the DRIP scores were 0. The horizontal tick marks are the DRIP scores on average for the previous 5 years. So for Rajasthan, DRIP scores are higher than 2019 and are also above the last 5-year average. For Madhya Pradesh and Orissa, these states too saw their scores rise as rains weakened in the interim. But with recent catch-up in rains, DRIP scores have improved. As of August 19, DRIP scores were higher than 2019, but below the past average. Similarly, the improvement in rains has helped bring down DRIP scores for soybean and maize over the last 2 weeks. For these crops, again, scores are higher than 2019, but below the 5-year average. The worry here, therefore, has subsided at the moment. But rainfall developments need monitoring. International weather forecasters are seeing a 60% chance of a La Nina weather condition occurring this year. A La Nina could trigger excess rains similar to 2010 and 2011, when August and September months received rainfall in the range of 6 to 13% above the long period average. Basically, July and August are critical months for the Kharif crop. So far, rains have been healthy for majority of the season and well distributed across regions. A lot now depends on how the last 2 weeks of August pan out. With this, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Pushan to take us through the rest of the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dipti. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on how the rainfall has panned out so far this year and what the DRIP scores have to tell us about the state as well as crop level stresses. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, what I'll take you through are the crop dynamics, the outlook on the farmer income for the ongoing Kharif season, its impact on the agriculture industries, and how certain short-term as well as structural measures taken by the government can impact the farmer sentiments. This will be followed by a panel discussion with our eminent panelists. So talking about the sowing trend so far, what we can see is year to date by about 14th of August, the sowing has been 10% higher on year. Now, if we look at that closely, I'd like to draw your attention to the chart on the left here. The shaded region shows the normal sown area for the Kharif season till about 30th of September. The yellow line shows the sowing for the current year, that is 2020. The dark line at the bottom shows sowing for the last year, that is 2019. And the green line, which shows a strong correlation of the sowing this year, is for 2017. Now, you would observe that the sowing was quite delayed last year. That's on account of delayed monsoon progress till about middle of July last year, which is why by June we had a 44% higher sowing on year. And that has narrowed down as we have moved along. And it's right now about 10% higher than last year. And rains, since they caught up post-July, the sowing you would observe inched up for 2019 and went towards the 2017 levels. Now, there's a strong correlation between 2017 and 2020, which is why we've put it here. And I would like to draw your attention now to the chart on the right. Now, here you would see we've put down the sowing trend till July end for the last, for 2020, 2019, and 2017. You'll see that the rainfall trend for 2020 and 2017 were quite similar, being around 1 to 2% above normal by July end. And which is why even the sowing data shows a similar trend. Now, you would observe post-July, the mouth of the chart is opening. And that's on account of better rainfall progress in August this year as compared to 2017. So as the season closes, we expect the sowing to be about 2 to 3% higher than last year levels, 2019 as well as 2017. And we expect it to be about 4 to 5% above normal this year. Now, having spoken about sowing at a broader level, now let's try to understand what this means for the various crop categories. At CRISIL, we cover about 25 crops. Now, here we've divided this into field crops and horticulture crops. Field crops account for around 85% of the sown area in the country, and horticulture has about 15% share. Within that, we're covering cereals, which includes paddy, maize, coarse cereals like jawar, bajra, ragi, cash crops, which are cotton, sugarcane, jute. In oilseeds, we're covering soybean and groundnut. In case of pulses, it's tur and urad. In case of the horticulture crops, for fruits, we're largely covering apple and banana. In case of vegetables, it's onion, tomato, and brinjal. And in spices, we're largely covering chili. Now, having said that context, let's look at how the sowing trend is expected to be for the Kharif season for each of these categories. In case of cereals, we're expecting a 2% increase in acreage. Interestingly, the eastern states are showing a sharp increase in the sown area under paddy. And that's on account of the reverse migration that has happened this year. And hence states like UP, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal, as well as certain southern states, are showing a sharp increase in the paddy acreage. However, maize, on the other hand, because of reduced demand from poultry sector, which accounts for more than 50% of maize consumption, that's showing a decline in acreage across most parts of the country. Coming to the cash crops, while sown area is increasing under sugarcane, we're seeing a mixed trend when it comes to cotton. The key regions that grow cotton, that is Gujarat and Maharashtra, accounting for half of the sown area, are showing a sharp decline in cotton acreage. And that's on account of prices, which we expect will be lower by around 8 to 10% this year. But if we talk about the sown area in Punjab and Haryana, that's showing an increase for cotton. Now, because of the reverse migration, paddy is quite a labor-intensive crop, and transplanting it requires a lot of manpower. As a result of that, people have gone for early sowing of cotton in the northern states. And in the southern states, interestingly, in Telangana, we're seeing a 25% increase in cotton area. And that's on account of the government asking farmers, encouraging them to sow cotton if they want to avail incentives and subsidies. Now, coming to the oil seeds, we're looking at increase in area for soybean in Madhya Pradesh, which has a significant share there, and for groundnut in Gujarat. In case of pulses, for tur, urad, we're expecting increase in acreage in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and that's also supported by good monsoon spread. Coming to the fruits, we're seeing increase in acreage for apple as well as banana, and that's supported by the National Horticulture Mission as well. In case of vegetables, the farmer sentiment towards this crop has been quite negative because it was severely impacted because of its perishable nature during the pandemic. And we're expecting a decline in the vegetable sowing, specifically for tomato, where there was a lot of post-harvest losses because of supply chain issues that time. And we're seeing some movement away, crop shift away from tomato towards brinjal in the eastern states and towards chili in the southern state. And chili acreage, therefore, we're expecting that to increase by about 3% this year. Now, having spoken about the sown area trend, now let's look at the productivity. Now, in terms of productivity for cereals, we're expecting a sharp increase in the paddy acreage, and that's going to take the overall cereal acreage up. However, a case in point here is in the northern states like Punjab and Haryana, which have a high yield for this crop, because they have gone for direct sown paddy. Farmers who opted for sowing paddy and not cotton, some of them have gone for direct sowing. Typically, direct sown paddy accounts for about 2 to 4% of the overall paddy acreage. This year around, it is expected to increase to about 10 to 15%. And direct sown paddy has yield lower by about 4 to 5%, which is what is going to bring down the productivity for cereals to some extent. In case of cash crops, we're expecting an increase in the sugarcane productivity. That's on a low base because last year, towards the end of the season, both in Karnataka and Maharashtra, we had excessive rainfall. And on a low base, we're expecting improvement in sugarcane productivity and also improvement in the cotton productivity. In case of oilseeds, again, in Madhya Pradesh, there were excessive rainfalls towards the end of the season. So on a low base, we're expecting soybean productivity to improve. In case of Gujarat too, we saw excessive rainfall, which impacted groundnut productivity last year. So on a low base, we're seeing a bumper increase in productivity for both these commodities. In case of pulses, with better crop management and good monsoon spread, we're expecting the productivity to improve. Coming to the fruits, we're expecting improvement in both banana as well as apple productivity. Last year, we had a good winter season, and that's going to aid the productivity for the apple crop. In fact, we're expecting better quality produce as well this year. In case of vegetables, we've had excessive rainfall in the southern part of the country, and South India has a significant share for horticulture commodities. And as a result of that, we're expecting a decline in the productivity for vegetables. In case of spices, we're expecting an improvement in productivity for chili. Now, looking at both sowing as well as the productivity, I come to the output, which is shown in the percentages here. What you can clearly see is that we're expecting a bumper production across commodities, barring only vegetables, which is expected to see a decline. Specifically, oilseeds are expected to see a sharp increase in production, and we feel that could have a negative bearing on the price front, definitely for them. Now, moving to the next important ingredient, that is prices. Again, here for our analysis, we've divided into field crops, which you see on the left, and the horticulture crops on the right. And what this line indicates, it's a weighted average price index. CRISIL tracks 25 crops across 2,000 mandis, which account for about 25 to 30% of the mandi arrivals. And basis the weighted average trend, we have arrived at this chart and also put our forecast. So while you can see that in the second quarter of this calendar year, that is in April, May, June, the prices started plummeting for the field crops. Although if we look at it in terms of a sequential or a year-on-year decline, the impact was not as significant. Because unlike the perishable commodities, the field crops can still be stored by the farmers. But if you look at the same thing for the horticulture crops, which includes both fruits, vegetables, and spices, we saw a % sequential decline. So the index moved from 142 to around 90 levels as a sequential 40% decline and a year-on-year 20% decline. So clearly the level of fall that we have seen in the horticulture is significant, which is what is leading to some negative farmer sentiment for these crop segments. Although we expect price recovery going forward, but if we talk about the full year, we expect the horticulture prices to be lower by about 14% on year from the highs of last year. And for the field crops, we expect prices to decline by about 1% this year. Now, having looked at the output as well as the prices, we've superimposed the cost on this particular analysis to come out with the profitability. And this profitability is in profit per hectare, rupees per hectare, at a C2 cost, which is a comprehensive cost, which includes the imputed rent on land and all of the miscellaneous costs as well for the farmers. In case of cereals, we're looking at the profitability to improve by about 10%, and that's aided by incremental sowing for the paddy crop and also healthy government procurement that was witnessed even in the Rabi season. In fact, in states like Telangana, a lot of paddy procurement happened by the state government, and also in Madhya Pradesh, we saw increased procurement for the wheat commodity. Coming to the cash crops, while sugarcane profitability is expected to increase, and recently the government has announced the sugarcane prices, the advised prices are expected to increase by about 3.6%. So that will aid profitability, but that will be offset by the cotton crop, which we are expecting that crop to see a price decline of about 10% this year. In case of oilseeds, we're expecting a bumper harvest, like you saw on the previous slide, a 16% increase in output, and that's going to put pressure on the prices for the commodity, where we expect the soybean prices to decline, which will bring down the profitability for these crops. In case of pulses, while the commodity is at a negative profit in terms of C2 cost, but at A2 plus FL, which does not look at a comprehensive way of looking at costs, it only includes the inputs and family labor. So in terms of cash profits, the crop will show improvement in profit. In case of fruits, like I mentioned earlier, because of better harvest quality of the apple crop this year, better quality of produce, we're expecting the apple prices to move up, and that will support the profitability for the fruit segment. In case of vegetables, we saw all-time high prices last year, and on a high base of last year, we're expecting the profitability to decline by about 9%. And same is the case also with chili, which is exported to a great extent, and we see some stress on the export side for this particular commodity. Now, we've looked at the crop-wise profitability trend. So in the interest of time, I will not focus on the crop dynamics on this slide and only talk about the regional dynamics. So again, for our analysis, we've looked at the profitability at a level for both field crops, horticulture crops, and to arrive finally at the pan-India profitability at a weighted average level. So what we can observe here is, in case of the field crops, you would observe that at a C2 cost, the profitability is between 10,000 to 15,000 rupees per hectare on an average for farmers. While for the horticulture crops, the profitability is in the range of 40,000 to 50,000 per hectare. Interestingly, 85% of the area for farmers is under field crops and only 15% is under horticulture crops. And given the higher profitability of horticulture crops, this is one of the reasons why the government is trying to diversify farmers from their traditional crops towards more horticulture crops. Now, if you look at the northern region, we see an improvement in profitability. We're expecting that to improve by about 1%, aided by paddy, however, brought down by cotton. As you would recall that I mentioned that in Punjab and Haryana, they have gone for increasingly cotton sowing, which will bring down the profitability to some extent. In the southern state, a good procurement for paddy, which happened last year, as well as in the Rabi season, as well as good price stability on pulses front will support the profitability for the southern region. The eastern region is expected to show an improvement on a very low base, and that's again on account of procurement that's taking place in West Bengal and Odisha in the previous season. The western region is the only one amongst the field crops which is expected to show a decline, and that's on account of reduction in profitability for both soybean as well as the cotton commodity, which are quite concentrated in these states. Now, coming to the horticulture side, if you look at the four regions, only the northern region is expected to show an improvement in profitability aided by apple, while the other regions are expected to see a decline in profitability, largely attributed to the lower prices. So at a weighted average level, we're expecting the pan-India profit for farmers to increase by about 3 to 5% for the Kharif season. And for the northern region, it is going to maintain its stronghold, commanding the highest profitability owing to better yields, larger land holding sizes, and the profitability is expected to improve by 2%, while in the southern region, the profitability is going to be at similar level as compared to last year. Eastern region will increase profitability on a low base by 26%, providing incremental opportunities to agri-input manufacturers, and the western region is going to expected to show a decline of 4% in profitability. So till now, we've looked at the profitability from the cultivation activities. For this analysis, what we've done on this slide is we've added other sources of income for farmers, that is Manrega as well as dairy. So we have field crops, horticulture, Manrega and dairy, and these together add up to about 45% of income for farmers. Now the remaining 55% comes from other sources like wages from the government sources as well as informal sector, from fisheries and other allied activities. So if we look at these four heads that we have here in front of us, like we've already seen, we're expecting an improvement in profit in absolute terms from field crops, as a slight decline on the horticulture side. In case of Manrega, interestingly, the government has recently increased its allocation by about 40,000 crores. And a lot of disbursement has also happened in the first 4 months. And hence, we're expecting an improvement in incomes from Manrega owing to this 43% higher allocation that we see on here. While in case of dairy, while the production is expected to increase by about 5 to 7% this year, but there's a lot of challenge that farmers are facing on the price front, especially from the informal sector, which is procuring milk from farmers. All in all, we're expecting rural incomes, farmer incomes to increase by about 8 to 10% from these four sources, which account for about 45%. Now, for the remaining 55%, although there is lack of data availability for most of it, we believe that will definitely see some downward pressure, and hence this number at an overall level could be lower than what we are looking at for these 45%. Now, having looked at the picture so far, it seems that the rural sentiments are quite favorable. However, there are certain risks that are emerging, which we thought are worthy to call out at this moment. On this chart, what you see is an analysis of how the COVID pandemic has moved from March to August. The blue bars represent districts which are urban in nature, which have lesser than 60% population, rural population share, while the green bars have more than 60% population coming from rural India. So as we see the movement from March, it was about more than 80% of COVID cases were concentrated in urban India. But as we have moved along to August, it's an equal split, almost at around 50-50%. To underline that point further, on the chart on the right, we have the cumulative cases. The line here shows urban India, shows total pan-India. The line below shows urban India, and the line below that is for rural India. And these are as of 13th of August. What we see is from June to August, rural India has seen a 7.4 times increase in the COVID cases, while urban India has seen a 3.3 times increase. Now, clearly, what we're seeing is that the cases are fast spreading and rapidly increasing in rural India. In our base case, we've assumed that the pandemic will peak out by September. And during the main harvest season, that is in October and November, the impact will not be as severe. Now, unlike a manufacturing organization which can stagger its production, unfortunately, all of the farmers' produce comes together. That is in the harvest season in October, November. So in case the pandemic peaks during that time and causes disruption on the supply chain as well as in the harvesting operations, there could be downside pressure to the farmer income. Now, moving ahead with our base case and looking at the impact that the income will have on the agriculture input sectors, we're looking at for the essentials, that is fertilizer, pesticides, and seeds, we're expecting growth of around 2 to 3%. A lot of pre-buying has happened, especially for the fertilizer and pesticide segment, on account of the rapid sowing and advanced sowing that we saw in the earlier slide. In case of seeds, you'll interestingly note that while the overall sowing I mentioned is going to increase by 2 to 3%, seed revenue is only increasing by around 1%. And that's because 27% of seed revenue comes from the cotton crop. And cotton is expected to see sowing decline by about 1.5% this year, putting pressure, downward pressure on the seed revenues, which is expected to grow by about 1%. On the other hand, on the mechanization front, farm equipment and tractors, because of the reverse migration of laborers from large northern states like Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, and Rajasthan, we are seeing good traction for demand for both tractors as well as farm equipment, which are likely to grow in the range of around 4 to 7% this year. Now, having looked at how the crop dynamics are, how the income sentiments are, which seem favorable, although there are certain risks, and also having looked at the impact of the input on the input sectors, now let's look at certain measures that the government has taken, both on the short term as well as on the long term. On the short term side, the map for here, the percentages here indicate the share of the sown area for each of the states. The color coding has been done as per the disbursement for both the cash incentive scheme from the central government, that is PM Kisan, as well as state-specific schemes. Various states have different state schemes on the cash incentive front. For example, Telangana has Raitu Bandhu scheme, Andhra Pradesh has Raitu Bharosa, and similarly, many other states also have such schemes. What we've done is we've looked at the disbursement of these cash incentives from April to August and divided the disbursement by the total number of farmers in these states to give a weighted average sense as to what is the kind of money that an average farmer would receive. And what we see is that a state stands out, where the disbursement is as high as 10,000 per farm family. In case of Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Punjab, the disbursement is close to 4,000 to 7,000 rupees. Now, I'll draw your attention to certain states in the middle, which account for a significant share in the sown area. That is Rajasthan, UP, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, which together account for more than 50% of the sown area in our country. These states so far have received about 1 to 4,000 rupees per farm family. And we believe this additional cash incentive will definitely aid farmers' income. And it depends when these are disbursed. In case they are disbursed during the harvest season, they could be spent on post-harvest activities. If they're disbursed during the crop care stage, it could be spent on pesticides, fertilizer, and other consumer goods. Now, coming to the structural measures, and I will not spend too much time on this because we have an eminent panelist who will share their thoughts on how they see the impact of these schemes. But there are three large reforms that have been announced. That is the Essential Commodity Act, the Farmers Produce Act related to APMC, and another reform on the contract farming front. So with that, I'll conclude this presentation and hand over the discussion to Mr. D.K. Joshi, Chief Economist at CRISIL, who will moderate the session. Over to you, Mr. Joshi.
Thank you very much, Pushan, and hello everyone, and once again welcome to the Agri webinar. Now we have panel discussion with three very eminent experts. They need no introduction, but let me do the formality. Dr. Ashok Gulati is a renowned agriculture economist and also the former chairman of CACP. Mr. Shiv Kumar oversees agriculture and IT business at ITC. ITC has a very strong foothold, as you would all know. And Mr. Vilas Sinde, founder and CEO of farmer producer company Sayadri Farms, which is a very successful venture and is present across the entire value chain in agriculture. Before we launch into the panel, let me say a few words from my side. We all know that I think in the recessions that India had, about 4 or 5 in the past, they were all caused by agriculture. Agriculture used to have a large share in GDP, and any drop in agriculture GDP was so severe at times that it could not be offset by the non-agriculture sector. take the most recent recession of 1979-80, when India's GDP fell by 5.2%, which was a very bad monsoon year, and we had 13% drop in agriculture GDP. At that time, agriculture had a share of 40%, and the non-agriculture sector did not have enough heft to offset it. Now, this time we have a very different situation. This is the first recession in India when agriculture is playing a supportive role. But with 15% weight in GDP, it doesn't have the weight to offset the deep contraction that is taking place in the non-agriculture, which is industrial and services sector. These account for around 85% of GDP. Well, that said, the agriculture still punches much more than its weight in GDP. It supports about 40% of, more than 40% of the workforce, and is a very critical supplier of much needed nutrition during the pandemic times. So by any measure, I think agriculture is a fairly important theme this year. So we have divided the panel into 3 rounds. The first one will talk about the state of the play, which is about agriculture and rural growth expectations. Round number 2 will move on to agriculture trade. I mean, what role it has in the Atmanirbhar Bharat policy. And then finally, we'll look beyond these and look at what could be the game changers for agriculture in India. So the first question is for Dr. Gulati. Agriculture seems to have escaped the clutches of the pandemic. Rains are normal, as we saw. Sowing is good. Nobody is talking about the locust attack anymore. Output growth is expected to be in the positive zone. CRISIL expects 2.5% growth in GDP, agri GDP. And food inflation has started inching up, which is a paradox when the output is good. But I think in agriculture, we have many paradoxes. So, sir, how do you see farmers' prosperity this year vis-a-vis last year, and in relation to the laudable objective of doubling their income by 2023? Dr. Gulati.
Well, thanks, Dr. Joshi and your team for a wonderful presentation on the shaping up of agriculture this year so far till August, what the monsoon has been. But I want to really start with when the COVID was there, more than the sowing, it was the harvesting of the previous crop. And the commendable job that has been done in terms of harvesting during the lockdown period, as well as in procurement operations, which are unprecedented. So literally 39 million tons of wheat was procured without much trouble. I think that has given the food security to the country. This is one remarkable achievement that the government and the agencies have done. Secondly, the income that has gone to the farmers. If you look at the MSP of wheat and the procurement that was done, more than 70,000 crores have already gone to the farmers' pockets. This is only the procurement part of it. There were other crops, especially horticulture crops, which suffered because of the supply line breakdown in between, and many prices started coming down dramatically, and at the wholesale level, and retail was going up. There was a lot of disturbance. But again, commending the government, they could fix the supply lines. You did not find people having food riots or people waiting for a week that they can't get their vegetables or milk or eggs. So all the perishable commodities were very much within the reach. Now that gave a momentum. So when the sowing started and the rains were a little earlier than the normal, the sowing was showing, and people thought, oh, 35% higher sowing this year, or 30% higher sowing. At the end of the round, it may be just 2 or 3% change in sowing. But the income that they got from the previous harvest also led to an increased demand for fertilizers, pesticides, and even farm equipment. And that has given some good hope and robustness in the growth prospects. Now your question, your own slides, your team slides showed that income is likely to be increasing and at different rates. My submission to your team would be that instead of calculating at cost C2, they should look at cost A2, which are the paid out costs by the farmers. Actually, that is what matters much more to the farmers than the C2 question. Yes, that income is going up, but there is Manrega that is coming up, and there is PM Kisan that is coming up, all positives. But one thing that is missing in your analysis is the remittances that used to come from the urban areas to the rural areas. And because of this reverse migration, people have gone back and they don't have those jobs and their incomes have collapsed. If they are working in Manrega, they are working at half the income level. So whether in net, the rural areas will have a higher income or almost the same income, I'm not 100% sure on that. But let's be positive and say that at least agriculture side will give them something positive on that. Your question specifically whether it will double the farmers' incomes by 2022-23. Well, that slogan and the dream was shared by the Honorable Prime Minister in 2016. It was 7 years horizon, and what was estimated was it needed 10.4% increase in real incomes per annum. That has not happened. If you look at the growth rate of agriculture and farmers' income, although the data is not there after 15-16 on farmers' incomes, but even if you approximate with the previous how the growth of agriculture had increased and how the incomes have increased, they follow very closely each other. I don't think even 50% of the target of doubling of farmers' income by 2022-23 will be achieved. My estimates are roughly about 40% of the target will be achieved. If you shift the goalpost to 2030, then maybe you will be able to double farmers' real income with a base of 15-16. We are way behind on that. Over to you.
Well, sir, yeah, at least the farmers' income is rising, I mean, though not at a pace which government would like. Now, moving on, sir, to Mr. Shiv Kumar. So we talked about agriculture and non-agriculture part of the rural economy. I think agriculture is 15 and non-agriculture rural is about 35%. And I think some recent data on FMCG and also on consumer non-durable category of IIP are showing that there is some robustness there. So how do you, as a company which has such a strong footprint in the rural economy, how do you see agriculture and non-agriculture part of the rural economy play out this year? Can the rising spread of COVID-19 to rural areas, can it be a spoiler for the rural story this year?
Yeah, I think on balance, well, we have seen, as also validated in your presentation, there are variations across regions and crops. But on balance, if you see, there is certainly more positive outlook, because there is more money in the hands of rural India after factoring also the point that Ashok made on whether remittances reduction is compensated by various governments' schemes. I think something which was more significantly besides the Manrega scheme and Kisan and all of that, I think what gave a little bit more net discretionary amount in the hands of people in rural India is the ration scheme, the Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. I think that gave some more money net from whatever that we have seen, besides of course doubling Narega and more tranches of Kisan going in. And that together with the optimism that is now seen in the Kharif crop, with the progress of monsoon being near normal. Of course, as always, there are some locations where there is excess rain and some parts where there is deficiency. And obviously with higher crops, there will be some crops we'll see lower prices. But on balance, there is also an optimism. So between more money in the short run, as well as not much of a concern on, we still have long time to go for an agricultural Kharif season also, but not so much concern on that side. I think combination of this is what really gave people to spend more And that's the reason we have seen increased spends in FMCG as well as durables, farm imports, machinery. I think somewhat cross-cutting, both productivity enhancing spends as well as hygiene. We have seen, much like in urban, significant scale up that is happening on personal hygiene products there as well. So on balance, I'm more optimistic that some of this is going to sustain. As far as COVID is concerned, we also seen in the graph that you just presented, we are certainly seeing more numbers over the last 2 weeks than what you've seen in the prior 20 weeks in rural. That together with the inadequate healthcare infrastructure in rural will be a matter of concern. But I think on the positive side, the density of rural population is far lower compared to what we have in urban. And then therefore the spread is going to be not as much concern. And two, over all these many months, the level of awareness is also much better, both in terms of the pandemic itself, as well as the precautions that need to be taken to reduce the spread, and what care needs to be taken at home if there is a problem. So I think given all of this, I will not be very unduly worried as to how it might spoil. But this is something that we need to watch very closely, because we have just seen 2 weeks of significant rise compared to what you've seen in the past. So we need to monitor very, very closely.
Yeah, I think true, because I think COVID-19 is a highly unpredictable and an exponential problem. So it's very difficult to visualize what's going to happen. So I think we need to be on the guard, you're right. Coming to Mr. Vilas Shinde, so there has been a significant disruption in demand as well as supply, I think at the global level, at the regional level, and also at the local level. And I think you deal more in horticulture, and which is about 1/3 of the Indian agriculture and has extremely high price volatility. Everybody seems to be a little worried about the horticulture farmer this year. So what has the pandemic done to the perishable growing farmers, particularly fruits and vegetables? And from your perspective, the organization like FPOs and FPCs, farmer producer corporations like yours, what kind of role are they playing in negotiating this pandemic for F&B farmers particularly? Mr.
First of all, good evening to all of you, and thank you, CRISIL, for giving this opportunity to share my views on this platform. Coming to your question, definitely everybody understand, because of the perishable nature, horticulture sector is always facing the major challenges on the market side, specifically the small and marginal farmers who are not having the capacity to negotiate in the market. They're always at the mercy of different factors. And during COVID situation, we face a lot of issues in domestic market and also in export market. When the situation created in March, that the lockdown situation, whether in India or in most part of the world, everywhere this situation has happened, that the prices immediately crashed down in last week of March to up to middle of the April. Grapes prices, which were between 80 to 100 rupees the ex farm, that came down to 10 rupees to 20 rupees in the first week of April. And the February situation, where the market were very promising. In February, we shipped a few consignments by air. That was the demand in Europe. But in next 2 months, the market completely crashed down. The same situation happened with most of the fruits. Banana situation was the same. The prices came down from 15 rupees to almost 5 rupees to 6 rupees. A lot of banana got wasted due to unharvested situation. But in few crops, in fruit crops, specifically in citrus crops, and also in mango, actually the situation was different because of in citrus, the immunity, whatever the thoughts are coming, that vitamin C is required for boosting the immunity. citrus prices actually went up. And also in mango, the situation happens completely different. From last year, mango prices were completely at bottom level, but this year actually the mango prices went above the average level. And in processing industry, a lot of people face issue because of the limited supply of the mango. And that was because of the climate situation, because of the January and December situation. Flowering was less and mango supply was short. Against vegetable, you will see that the prices was completely crashed down everywhere, not only in a few part of the country, but throughout the country. Vegetable prices completely crashed down, and that was because of the perishable nature. And also, there was no any continuous supply chain from the farmer side. I think in such situation, the farmer producer company model has proven that there are some hopes from the cooperative. If they will create some solution on the supply chain side, definitely farmer could save in such situation. In at Sahyadri, we have experienced this actually the concept due to the whatever the control system Sahyadri has created in last 7-8 years. Whatever the issues we faced in export side, we could save some losses due to the some development on the retail side. Whatever the supply chain Sahyadri has created in last 2-3 years. Because of that, we could continue the supply chain at least in nearby cities like Pune, Mumbai, Nasik, and through that we could manage to save some losses on vegetable side and also on the food side. Same initiative happens from a lot of small farmer producer companies in nearby cities like Pune, Aurangabad, Satara, Kolhapur. Also on north side, some APCs nearby Delhi, they also took initiative to create the small supply chains in nearby cities, and through some farmers, they could save their losses because of the such APCs initiatives. Also, on the processing side, whatever the infrastructure has created by such cooperatives, through that also actually some farmers, they got support. Like in Sahyadri, lot of tomato we processed during the lockdown period. Also crops like sweet corn, also some vegetables like okras, carrot. In that we got solution because of the processing setup created by the farmer producer company. I think during this lockdown period, the actual the farmer producer companies the model strength or the cooperatives need. I think it realized to everyone, to the farmer and also to the government.
Well, thank you. I think that's quite interesting. And I think it's at a broad level, I think it deepened the crisis, which was always there for fruits and vegetable growers. But I think there are some mechanisms which allowed, like yours, to protect the farmer income and also to protect the output, to protect the wastage. Now, coming to the round 2, I think where we talk about the role of agriculture trade, I think particularly in context of the Atmanirbhar Bharat program. Well, India, I think, unlike other merchandise commodities, India in agriculture runs a trade surplus and has been doing it for quite some time. But I think what we have noticed is that, and Dr. Gulati, you had pointed it out in your recent articles as well, that after a vertical lift, I think in 2009, between 2009 and 2013, the exports have stagnated. In fact, 2019-20 exports of agriculture products were lower than 2013-14. So what's gone wrong? And what should be done to push agri exports in the short as well as medium run, particularly in the context of Atmanirbhar Bharat program? Government seems to be talking about a twofold approach of boosting agriculture exports with emphasis on value addition, and together with it, they also want to do import substitution. So how do you see all this play out, and what your suggestion would be?
Well, on this question of Atmanirbhar Bharat, as far as agriculture is concerned, overall, you take it 20 years back or even 30 years back since the time reform started in 91, Indian agriculture has been always net exporter. If you take the last 15, let's say, years, from 2004-5, it peaked, the exports peaked in 13-14, touching about $43 billion when the imports were about $18 billion. So you had a net surplus of about $25 billion in 2013-14. That was the last year of the UPA government. After that, what had happened, three things. One, the global prices, after having touched the peak, in 2011 and then 13, started gradually coming down. That was one part of the story. But second part of the story was that we inherited at that time a higher inflation. And you recall 14, 15, 15, 16, India had 2 successive droughts. And that is when there was a lot of brakes applied on export bans or pulses or others, all sorts of things. So there was that we have to bring down the inflation. That was the target, because the previous government, UPA government, perhaps lost. One of the reasons was that high inflation rate, and the new government that came in had a specific target of reducing the food inflation. Now, it was helped by global prices coming down, and then also some of these stocks that were released, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, now we are saddled with so much of stocks. You look at grains, against a buffer stock norm of 41 million tons. In June end, literally you were having about 97 million tons of food grain stocks. You don't know where to keep it. And your MSP prices have, at least in wheat, have gone beyond the global prices, and you're stuck. So this is one of the reasons that you cannot increase farmers' incomes only through a price policy when your prices go beyond the global prices. Then it will only lead to accumulation of more and more stocks. You look at the 3 commodities, wheat, rice, and sugar, where sort of MSP policy is more pronounced than other crops. And all the 3, you have huge opening stocks, which are not exportable without a subsidy, literally, except basmati rice, and even your common rice has been coming down, and within another 2 years, maybe common rice exports also will come down to a grinding halt. So we have to be careful that you want to augment farmers' incomes by raising prices. There is a limit up to which you can go. And that limit is set by global prices. After that, it will be a distortion in the system and more of accumulation of stocks and massive allocative inefficiency. The better way is use an income policy, give an investment support to the farmers, and direct income on per hectare basis. That's the way to perhaps go. Now, at present, I don't see, except giving, a freight subsidy, which is allowed under WTO, some of the incentives that you can give for exporting your commodity. You have surplus of sugar, you have surplus of cotton, you have surplus of rice, wheat, you talk about it. And, there has to be a package, an incentive package, which takes care of some of the costs of the farmer. Only then you can get rid of these surplus stocks. On the import side, there is a better possibility of some import substitution, because your imports are quite concentrated. And the biggest import item is your edible oil. About $10 billion worth of edible oil is imported every year, 15 million tons. Unfortunately, from your traditional oil seeds, if you want to produce additional 15 million tons of edible oil, you need about 40 million hectares of additional land under oil seeds under the traditional. The only crop that can give you a very high oil content per hectare basis is palm oil. Now, palm oil, which is the 70% of the imports of edible oils roughly in the country, there is some area, about 2 million hectares, that has been identified earlier, but it has a long gestation crop. And ordinary farmer cannot wait for 6 years when there is hardly any fruit, and after that for 25 years. So there is a massive plan investment subsidy that is needed for the farmers. Otherwise, you have to allow the corporates, for example, in tea plantations or coffee plantations, you have a long-term investments for 25, 30 years. But to do that, you have to declare, palm oil as not a horticulture crop, but as a plantation crop. So there has to be a legal change so that corporates can enter into that area. Otherwise, most of the other commodities of imports, exports, our exports are much more diversified, which is good. Imports are somewhat concentrated, and edible oil, it has, the solution of this has been missing for a long, long time. Just raising the duty to 50%, 70% is not a solution. Atmanirbharta has to be on a competitive basis. And the best way to support that is give investment subsidies if you have to give, but not a perpetual annual subsidies of the type of high prices or on inputs. So that's where I will stop. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very interesting. I think I will move to the one other leg of the doing well as far as the exports or trade is concerned, which is supply chains. I think they are extremely important for stability of domestic food supplies. I think we heard a little bit from Mr. Shinde on how I think it helped during the pandemic. Also, not only for domestic, but also for exports. I think as the food moves from the farm to the fork. And ITC, I think, has been involved in agriculture exports as well for quite some time. So, Mr. Shiv Kumar, from the corporate perspective, what are the key bottlenecks in the supply chain that hold you from realizing the full potential of exports? And what has the pandemic taught us in this regard that we need to take into account as we move ahead?
Yeah, basically, I would say there are two bottlenecks in some sense, and competitiveness that Ashok talked about will need to come into play. The first one is to do with our logistics and factor costs. If you look at logistics, India's logistics cost as a percentage of GDP is about 14%. When you look at any of the competing countries, it will be more between 6 and 10% max. So an average of 8%. So we are kind of outbeaten when it comes to logistics. Very similarly for other factor costs, when it comes to value addition, be it the cost of finance or cost of electricity, these are also on the higher side. And logistics, one important way in which we can bring down the cost is increasing the share of rail in the total logistics system. I think one of the interesting things that the pandemic had taught us on a domestic supply chain perspective certainly is how rail can be used. Because the passenger trains were off tracks, we had very innovative usage of the rail mechanisms for smaller parcels, multiple destinations. And I think now the rail ministry has moved with interesting new options on how some of these can be sustained even when the passenger traffic comes back. But broadly, rail is one route to reduce the logistics cost, and the factor costs and other related whole value chain costs must also be made more competitive through some kind of a cluster approach where in the identified value chains with export potential or in the identified value chain with domestic demand linkages, we create the whole ecosystem in such a manner that you bring down the cost and you build those kind of necessary corridors so that you become competitive. And it obviously will take a time before you build it. And that's where I think the equivalent of investment subsidy, whether it's performance-linked investive scheme, not only for the farmers, but also for all the value chain participants who get involved, which get tapered off over a period of time, let's say over a 5-7 year period, they'll become zero. So that in the meanwhile, you try and build the capacity to reduce those costs. So this is one big aspect. The second is that in the new era of global trade, one needs to plug into the global value chains. It's not commodity on and off that you can say that, okay, we saw $43 billion at one time and then it drops to $35 billion another year. So that kind of volatility linked to whether we have a little bit more crop or whether government gives some subsidy on existing stocks with FCI to be liquidated. So if instead of that, if you have to really build a sustainable chain in the long run, we need to plug into global value chains, and part of that need to be value-added products also. Like you opened your initial remarks in this segment. And here again, it is important in terms of how the policy of more sustainable export policy, more predictable export policy, rather than a knee-jerk reaction every time there is a little bit of a deficit. That is one angle. And second is the way investments are not coming. Part of it was linked to the Essential Commodities Act in the past. And hopefully that should be a thing of past now. We will see as it gets executed when prices increase for some commodities in the coming months, whenever it happens. But hopefully if the value chain players get exempt from the essential commodity restrictions, more investments will pour in, and that's what will help in both the value addition as well as the cost competitiveness. What we learned from a global pandemic situation perspective on the supply chain front is that now we are seeing more demand from certain countries for more longer term contracts for food supplies. Those countries which are relying on single origin in the past are saying that no, that's too risky potentially in a similar kind of event in future. So can we diversify our supply sources in fresh fruits and vegetables in some cases and processed in some cases. And our ability to engage with any of these kind of contracts on a longer term basis over a multi-year contract doesn't exist in the absence of the entire backward integration. And again, I think some of the reform that we now saw will put this on a more predictable path that we can engage in these kind of contracts also going forward. Otherwise, it is pretty normal for many other countries to enter into 5-year contracts for supplies. But we can't think of anything of that kind in most of our agricultural commodities for the various reasons that I talked about. So that is the other thing. So the pandemic has only accentuated the need for us to make our own agri markets more market oriented, more competitive, and whatever support is provided to the farmer is provided in the form of direct benefit and not to distorting mechanisms. I think that will augur well going forward.
I think looks like agriculture will be one area where the crisis is not wasted, because this is seeing, I think, more fundamental changes. I think we are a little short on time, so may I request everyone to be a little brief than they have been, I mean, so that we complete on time. Mr. Shinde, I think your FPC captures the entire value chain in the sense that you have fresh fruits and vegetables and processed food which you supply to domestic as well as international markets. And clearly pandemic has been a very stringent test of resilience of your model, which has presence across the entire value chain. So did it, I mean, how did it help you diversify your risks? I think you've already spoken about it in your previous answer. Maybe if you want to add something to it, how it allowed you to diversify your risk in domestic market vis-a-vis export market, how did it help you preserve your profit, so to say?
Yeah, there is the model is completely based on the Amul's 3-tier system model. Only if you see the milk and fruit and vegetable, which are both are perishable commodities, but the challenges in horticulture sector, specifically in fruit and vegetable, are quite different challenges than milk industry. Milk is a year-round business, so 365 days supply chain one can easily establish in milk. But in horticulture, most of the crops are seasonal. So any crop-specific value sharing horticulture is very difficult to create. And also the challenges because of the quality, different quality nature coming from the field. It is not possible to create only one quality from the field. So definitely then the market also are different based on the quality. So actually at Sahyadri, from the initial days, what we understand that our challenge is to protect our farmer in case of glut situation or in case of some quality, to at least how we can provide him minimum support price, which the government is not offering, through our own ecosystem in case of such a glut situation. And when there is opportunity, how can get the best possible realization. So actually, instead of having one route, instead of having only one option, if there are multiple options at one point, if our organization will succeed in creating such a model, then only we can support farmer. In case of blood situation also, we can have best possible relation in opportunities. So Sahyadri has created 3 different routes from the beginning. The export route for the fresh trade, then the domestic who can directly reach to the consumer. So our own retail network and also the need-based processing. Because of this integrated business strategy, we actually tried to help our farmers during different situation, whether it is this last 4 months COVID situation or 3 years back the flood situation happening, grapes and tomatoes, also some drought situations. So in multiple different situations, we could save our farmers because of the integrated business strategy. Also the need-based infrastructure which we created in last 6 years based on our business strategy, that also helps us a lot because of our own post-service infrastructure. We managed to the different situations as per the need-based, whatever the challenges. And that's why actually I think in horticulture, the Sahyadri has created some impact, and that is proven during this lockdown period. Because of the integrated approach and because of the multiple options at one point, though we face some issues in export side, but through retail and also through processing, we got some solutions during this critical situation.
Thank you. I think so. Essentially, we need to. One lesson is that we need to replicate models like you, and I think scale them up. And I think so that and we need to look at how one can do it. I mean, at a larger scale. Now, I think for the next section, which is on game changers for Indian agriculture, we have seen that the recent reforms have infused a dose of optimism, I think, particularly for medium-term prospects for agriculture. And with that, let me, I think, first ask Dr. Gulati a question on the reform side. We all know that reforms don't have an impact immediately. I mean, they have to be done right, and they take time to have an impact. So I think from your perspective, I think this is just a beginning, and what else do you think is needed to extract the full benefit of these reforms? Particularly, I think from the point of view of developing the price discovery mechanism, and also I think the price realization to the farmers based on the quality of stuff they supply. So may I request you to be a little brief? I think this is a big question, but if you could do it in 2 minutes, I think that will be great.
Sure. The reforms will yield you results over 10 years, and you want to be in 2 minutes. Well, let me first commend the government that it was a big overdue thing that they have done in these 3 ordinances. But legal reforms may be a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition to deliver. And for sufficient condition to be put in place, you know, the processors will not be going to each and every individual farmer. So you need to create farmer-producer organizations or companies, a cluster approach, commodity-wise, and ensure that these farmer-producer companies or organizations get first the finance at the same rate at which farmers get their crop production finance. You know, most of the FPOs are getting finance from microfinance institutions at 18 to 22%. Who can do business at 22% interest rate when they are getting on their working capital? So I think we have to do a lot of things at NABARD level, at the level that farmers can get at 7%, not only for their crop production, but also post-harvest operations, the working capital for that. And in that context, I think PM's second step on August 9th, what he announced, Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, is also a complementary step. And NABARD's 10,000 FPOs target, if that is done quickly, but the biggest confidence has to be given to the private sector because they can put their supply lines and, you know, in a much faster way with their own investments, provided they have the confidence that these reforms and the legal framework will not be reversed at the drop of a hat if the prices go up. Last thing, the missing puzzle in this reform has been, they talk about one nation, one market, which is spatial integration. And these reforms, 3 ordinances are towards that. But they haven't talked about temporal integration of price discovery so that the future prices and the spot prices converge. For that, I think government policy makers need to understand how future markets work, and they are a medium of price discovery for the farmers, and they need to be dovetailed with all these reforms that have been done. It's a part of the same package, part of the same puzzle. Once they do it, I'm sure persons like Shiv or Vilas Shinde will take full advantage of this and create a very vibrant Indian agriculture that is competitive, inclusive, and exportable. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. I think for that very succinct answer, and I think you also answered one question which came to us through the chat window as to how to make FPOs viable, and I think the finance would be a big issue for them, as you just mentioned about the cost of finance for them. I think moving on, sir, to Mr. Shiv Kumar. I think we'll all agree that these reforms are more fundamental changes rather than a band-aid solution, which we have been seeing in agriculture in the last couple of years. So how does it allow the corporate like ITC to make a difference to the value chain in agriculture? So how are you reorienting your strategy, so to say, to benefit the farmers, to benefit yourself, your company, and I think benefit for everyone?
Yeah, let me briefly make 2 points. One is, I think, by removing the monopoly of APMCs and making it much more open, what the government is now enabled is really to transform our agriculture into more demand-responsive system rather than a production-driven system. So therefore, now the engagement of the market-oriented enterprises with farmers can really align the value chains differently. And that would mean that we are able to get better quality assurance, build more traceability, more attribute-based products, whatever be the demand from, whether it is the domestic market or export or for packaged or commodities, any which form. So I think that transformation is probably the most fundamental shift that is going to happen. And this is where the derivative market that Ashok talked about will also be relevant. One of the reforms which is not yet, in some sense, visible and not talked about as much is what the finance ministry had also done a few months ago, that options can now devolve on goods, not necessarily just the futures contracts. I think as these contracts get designed and get rolled out, it becomes much more easy for the farmers and value chain players to participate even through an options mechanism without necessarily waiting for the entire futures market to become deeper and wider. So this is one shift. The second other point, which is not yet flagged out, much has been talked about FPOs. Well, certainly it's an important pillar. But the other point is also equally important, is how the digital technologies are made use of in all this effort. This is one route in which you can do on scale, personalized to the individual farmers and make it real time. So whether it is farmer advisory services, whether it is the entire input marketplace or farm management services or equipment hiring, or it is the output market linkage, I think all of that is the other bit. So in addition to everything else that we are doing, the eChaupal 4.0, as we call it now, is a solutions integrator that multiple solutions brought by the various tech startups are integrated and made farmer-centric to be able to deliver this both through the FPO route as well as the local entrepreneurs route. So these are the 2 big steps which are now possible because of the reforms.
Well, I think that you rightly touched on the technology, and let me take this question to Mr. Vilas Shinde. I think there's generally a lot of chatter about how technology is reshaping our lives and the the work from home and everything else is changing. But I think for agriculture also, I believe, and I think as you rightly pointed out, I think technology could be a game changer. So Mr. Shinde, please let us know 2-3 ways in which technology can be a game changer for Indian agriculture. What do you see coming ahead?
If you see the Indian farmer's mindset, he's always saying that we can produce, but we cannot sell. And challenge for the small farmer that he cannot connect with the directly with the customer, end customer. I'm actually saying about the end customer who consumes that food. So that is actually the biggest challenge, which was not possible earlier. I think that now can break because of the technology. Whatever the new technologies has developed in last 15 years and that are changing the new other sectors. I think now in agriculture also, all these digital technologies are going to play an important role to change the scenario. And also it is possible for the small farmers that now they can compete in the global market with the efficiency which the big size farms in Australia or Europe or America, they are bringing. I think that is possible only because of the technology. And also the efficiency which is required at different level, whether it is at a farm production level or at post-harvest and also marketing. That is possible because of the technology interventions. At Sahyadri, we have few experiences like we have implemented blockchain technology for bringing the complete traceability and transparency throughout the agriculture value chain. So now through this platform, we are offering to our customer the complete traceability of the food. So from which farm that product is coming, what are the practices that farmer did for producing that particular product, also then the further post-harvest related operations, everything that the customer can visualize through this platform, then he can trust on the product in better way. So definitely then the price related issues we can sort out in better way. So to creating the trust between the customer, I think is possible because of the proper technology interventions. So same like the bringing efficiency on logistics side. We have developed one logistics solution with the help of one startup Nurserat, one innovation center in Nashik. So they have worked on the logistic related solutions from farm to the pack house or from pack house to the market, whatever the logistic operations are happening, how to bring efficiency on that logistic side. So that software is helping a lot for the farmer and also to the farmer producer company and also to the other stakeholder of the supply chain to manage the logistic operation efficiently. So we have observed last year that almost 7% we saved only because of the efficiency on logistic side which we got through these technology interventions. Like that, there are so many different interventions are happening because of the new technologies coming, new startups are coming in this sector. So definitely, I think technology is going to play an important role for Indian agriculture.
Well, thank you very much. I think this has been a very fascinating discussion, and I think we'll now move over to the Q&A. Before that, I think, Hetal, could you please run the poll question, which is going to take 30 seconds or so. I think audience will answer that.
Sure, sir. The polls have started.
I think the first question is on, I think, which is a very important question. Somebody has asked that is farm size a constraint for Indian agriculture? I mean, typically one of the arguments is that the size of the farm is very small and the scalability becomes a problem. Is this constraint insurmountable? I think anybody from the panel can take this question.
Well, if you want me to take it up.
Yeah, please.
You know, yes, farm size has been declining over a period of time. It's 1.08 hectare at this time. But remember that the basic inputs are perfectly divisible, whether it is seed, fertilizer, water, and so on and so forth. So long as farmers have access to these, then the productivity is not impacted at least. The problem comes on the marketing side, and this is where farmer producer organizations are needed. I'll just give you one little example that in China, the holding size is much smaller than us. The overall cropped area is less than ours, and they produce agriculture which is 3 times more than us, 3 times more than us. So their sky is the limit. It's only access to those inputs at a price and which can make it profitable for them to work out. But overall, I'm in favor of opening up the land lease markets and let the markets come up with what is called a viable, economically viable holding size. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the next question is on food processing related industries. I think we've been talking about it for a long time, but I think it's the amount of food that is wasted in India, I think still continues to be quite large. So Mr. Shiv Kumar, can you suggest some steps on what could be done to push food processing in India?
Yeah, 2 angles. One is the wastage is because we have been conventionally a production-driven system. And like I talked about, the fundamental game-changing opportunity now is to make it more demand-responsive. And together with the derivative markets and other methods of contracting with the farmer and so on, when you produce more linked to the demand, it is likely to be less wastage compared to production-driven system. As far as food processing is concerned, one of the reasons also being not enough backward integration by the food processors or the institutional setup of farmers not being able to forward integrate. I think that is another link which will probably now get established by virtue of new reforms. More importantly, what happens is that many of these crops are single season, and many food processing units end up with underutilized capacity. And therefore, it is important that these linkages will help in creating a 365-day processing opportunity so that your overall costs of processing also come down. So that is the second element. How do you get the capacity utilization up through better linkages? And lastly, there is still a general assumption that processed food is for the rich and therefore is taxed compared to unprocessed or unpackaged food. I think if you have to develop this industry and reduce the wastage, it is important that we have a situation where the taxation doesn't add more to the cost structures of already that is there in terms of logistics that I talked about, or the processing costs, which also have high factor elements. Therefore, I think if the taxation is also made fair, that is another way in which this can get increased. For example, a simple product like anomalies that exist, that if you have a package data but that has a brand, then you pay 5% more GST. And if it's an unregistered packaged, there's no GST. So these are all the anomalies which will make the food processors walk away from this industry. So I think these are the kind of steps which will help in food processing industry as well as lower wastage.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And the last question, I think, let me read it out. This is to Mr. Shinde. Finance Minister announced 10,000 crores for FPOs in the next 5 years. The question is, what is the best approach to make the FPO really sustainable? And what kind of strategy we need to finance them? I mean, should it? Dr. Gulati also raised an issue of finance. So, what is, from your perspective, Mr. Shinde, should be done to make FPOs really vibrant in this country?
I think everybody understands the importance of FPC now, whether it is in the form of farmer producer company or farmer cooperative or any other format. That without collective, the scale is not coming, and without scale, you cannot compete in the market with efficiency. But to make such organizations successful, there are a few challenges which we need to understand. I think the most important challenge is the farmer's mindset. That why this producer company is required. If the farmer will understand this thought, and also if they participated willingly in such organization, then only organization could make any difference. And on that line, then the main, I think, challenge becomes to make this mindset with this, whatever the strategies farmer producer company are making, and in that the farmer producer company's leadership role is important. Farmer producer companies or these FPCs are actually a vehicle to create a valuation to make that farming profitable. And I think then the vehicle can make difference with the proper drivers. The leadership role is important to make the farmer producer company concept successful. So the mindset of leadership, I think, is a crucial part, and also the support in initial period, whether it is on the initial capital creation side or the market linkages, or whether it is a technology related support or infrastructure related supports, all are equally important. And the hand holding up on these all challenges, I think, is required for making the farmer producer company successful. There, actually, the government's role is crucial, because the initial capital support on the capital side, also on the market linkage side, is definitely possible with government's interventions. A lot of farmer producer companies are making progress with the government's some procurement schemes where they are getting the opportunity to buy from the farmers and supply to the one main stakeholder, government, and along with that they could create their own market. Like that, there are, I think, different interventions are possible from government side in initial period. Also, concepts like some incubation center, which is a very now common concept in other industries, the startup. That is also possible to creating a farmer producer company segment where at incubation center, farmer producer company could get the support on their particular technical challenges or some finance related challenges, market related challenges, and they could make some good difference in within the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Gulati, Mr. Shivkumar, Mr. Shinde, for taking time out of their busy schedules, and I think for this wonderful discussion that we had. And now let me request Hetal to say a few words and finally close this webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone. A poll for sharing your feedback is available on your screens. Please use it. Thank you once again, all the panel members, for giving time for the CRISIL event. We would be having a presentation on the pharmaceutical sector tomorrow, same time, 3 o'clock, followed by a panel discussion. Please feel free to join. Also, the presentation and the chat conversation would be uploaded on crisil.com. Please feel free to access the link. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.